The morning Harlan Whitfield walked into Dovetail and Sons, Fine Furniture Restoration, he did not knock. That was the first thing Beau Callister noticed. 22 years of running the shop, and he had learned to read people by the way they entered a room. Most folks pushed the door open slowly, taking in the smell of linseed oil and sawdust, letting their eyes adjust to the amber light that filtered through the high transom windows. They came in careful, respectful, the way you'd enter a church or an old library. Harlan Whitfield walked in like she owned the place, or like she was already disappointed in it. She was 43 years old and wore the kind of confidence that money polishes over decades, until it looks indistinguishable from contempt. She worked as a senior partner at Whitfield & Crane Design Group, a firm whose name appeared on the lobbies of four-star hotels in Nashville, Atlanta, and Charlotte. She had a project deadline in 11 days and a problem she hadn't told anyone about yet. Beau set down the piece of butternut he'd been hand-planing and waited. "This is the restoration shop?" she said. Not asked. Said. The way you'd confirm that the thing in front of you was, in fact, a mop closet and not a conference room. "It is," Beau said. She looked around slowly. At the low wooden workbench running the length of the back wall. At the clusters of hand tools hanging from pegboard, chisels, card scrapers, shoulder planes, arranged in descending order of size. At the half-finished secretary desk in the corner, with its legs wrapped in moving blankets. At the photograph tacked near the door, a little girl maybe 6 years old, holding up a wooden birdhouse with both hands, and grinning like she'd just invented the wheel. "I was told you were the best," Harlan said. Her voice carried the particular flatness of a person who had stopped being impressed by things a long time ago. "Depends on what you need," Beau said. She opened her leather portfolio and laid a photograph on the workbench. It showed a dining table, a long oval piece in figured walnut, clearly handmade, with hand-cut dovetail joints at the apron corners and carved rope twist legs that tapered into ball and claw feet. Even in the photograph, the grain pattern was extraordinary. Flamed figure in the tabletop, swirling in the kind of pattern that took 40 or 50 years of slow growth to produce. "This belonged to my client's grandmother," Harlan said. "It was made by a craftsman in Vermont in 1931. My client, I'm doing the interior renovation of her home in Brentwood, wants this piece as the centerpiece of the new dining room. But it was in storage for 12 years. She paused. "There's significant damage." Beau picked up the photograph. He tilted it toward the light and looked at it for a long moment without speaking. "The tabletop has 3 stress fractures," Harlan continued. 2 of the legs have been repaired previously, badly. The finish is alligatored across the entire surface, and one of the carved feet is missing 2 toes. She said it the way a doctor reads off symptoms, efficiently, without sentiment. "I need it ready in 11 days, she said. "The installation crew comes November 14th. Beau set the photograph down. He looked at her. He was 51 years old, with broad hands that had a permanent light staining of walnut around the cuticles, regardless of how much he scrubbed, and a posture that came from decades of leaning over workbenches. He'd grown up in Cookeville, dropped out of community college after 1 semester when his mother got sick. Learned woodworking from his uncle, who'd learned it from his own father, in a small shop outside Knoxville. He had never designed anything that appeared in a magazine. His website had 3 pages and a gallery with photographs he'd taken himself. "I'd need to see it in person," he said. "Can't make a promise from a photograph." Harlan looked at him carefully. "My assistant can arrange transport, but I need to know if you're even capable of this kind of work before I waste." She stopped. "Before I waste my time." She didn't say it, but it sat in the air between them. Beau walked to the shelf along the east wall and picked up a small wooden box, maybe 8 inches long. Cherry, French polished to a depth that seemed to go down several inches into the wood. He set it on the workbench in front of her. She looked at it. "Open it," he said. She did. The hinges were brass, hand-fitted, moving without a sound. The interior was lined in dark green velvet and divided into compartments with thin strips of maple, each one hand-fitted, each corner mitered tight as a seam. "I made that when I was 27, Beau said. "For my wife." He was quiet for a moment, She passed when our daughter was 3. Harlan looked at the box. She did not say she was sorry. Your daughter, she said. That's her in the photograph? That's Audrey, he said. She's 9 now. Harlan picked up the box and turned it in her hands. She looked at the dovetail joints where the sides met the base. They were cut by hand, angled at exactly the right pitch, the tails and pins fitting together with the kind of precision that is not about measuring but about knowing. She set it down. Can you do it in 11 days? Bring me the table, Beau said. She did not thank him. She picked up her portfolio and walked out. The door closed behind her. Beau stood at his bench for a moment, then picked up the piece of butternut again and went back to planing. That afternoon, when Audrey got home from school, she dropped her backpack by the door and came straight into the shop the way she always did. She was 9 years old with her mother's dark eyes and a habit of asking questions in rapid succession, barely waiting for one answer before the next one was already coming. Did something happen today? She asked, looking at him. Beau smiled. She had always been able to read the room. Woman came in. Big job. Big how. Important piece. Old walnut table. Lots of damage. She's eaten 11 days. Audrey hopped up onto the stool at the end of the bench, the one she'd claimed at age 5 as her permanent post. She picked up a small piece of scrap poplar and turned it in her hands. Can you fix it in 11 days? That depends on what's really wrong with it, Beau said. Was she nice? He looked at his daughter. She was professional. Audrey considered this with the seriousness of a person who understood the difference. That means no, she said. Beau laughed quietly. Go do your homework. The table arrived the next morning on a panel truck. 2 men unwrapped it carefully on the shop floor while Beau walked around it slowly, not touching it yet, just looking. Up close, it was worse than the photograph suggested. The 3 stress fractures in the tabletop ran nearly the full width of the piece. The wood had been stored in conditions with dramatic humidity swings, contracting and expanding until something gave. The previous repairs on 2 of the legs were a disaster. Someone had used an epoxy filler the wrong color and had sanded across the grain, leaving scratches visible through the finish. The alligatoring on the surface was severe. The old finish cracked into a map of tiny irregular islands. And the missing toes on the carved foot, 2 toes from a ball and claw, the delicate individual curves that a carver's gouge produces over hours of patient work, were simply gone. Beau crouched down and studied the foot. He pulled a magnifying glass from his chest pocket and looked at the cut surfaces where the toes had broken away. Old breaks, dried out and clean. He stood up and walked to his reference shelf and pulled out 3 books, one on period furniture identification, one on American Federal and Empire styles, one that was simply a worn spiral-bound notebook he'd filled himself over 20 years with sketches and notes. He worked through his lunch. He didn't notice. Harlan Whitfield called at 2 in the afternoon. Have you assessed the table? I'm still in the middle of assessment, he said. I need a timeline, she said. My client has already approved the design board and the installation date is fixed. If this table can't be ready, I'll call you when I'm done, Beau said. Probably around 5. A pause. Mr. Callister, I know what you need, he said. Not unkindly. Let me do the work so I can tell you honestly what's possible. He called her at 5:15. He told her the stress fractures could be stabilized and filled, using traditional hide glue, and carefully matched wood dust from a piece of comparable grain. He told her the bad epoxy repairs would have to be stripped and redone properly. He told her the finish would need to come entirely off and be rebuilt from the wood up. Shellac French polish, the same method used on the piece originally. He told her the carved foot was the real problem. The carving on that foot is period work, he said. Whoever made this table had a very specific technique. The toes have an unusual undercutting where the claw grips the ball. If I carve replacement toes that don't match that, it'll be visible to anyone who knows what they're looking at. And you can match it? Harlan said. I think so, he said. I've been studying the other feet. The carver used a number 4 gouge and finished with a number 8 fishtail. The angles are consistent. He paused. I've carved period work before. I restored a matched set of Heppelwhite chairs 2 years ago for the Tennessee State Museum. You can call them to verify. Silence on the line. Then, what's your rate? He told her. Another silence, longer this time. That's more than I quoted my client for the full restoration. That's my rate for this job, Beau said. You're welcome to get other quotes. I don't know anyone else in a 3-state radius who'll attempt the carved foot and be honest with you about whether they can actually match it. The pause that followed was the kind Beau had learned to recognize, a person doing arithmetic in their head, weighing what they needed against what they wanted to believe was available cheaper somewhere else. Fine, Harlan said. 11 days. 10, Beau said. I need 1 day of cushion if the French polish needs a second application in the humidity we've been having. She agreed. She did not say thank you. The call ended. The third day was when it started to get hard. The stress fractures were manageable. Painstaking, requiring the glue to be worked deep into the cracks with a palette knife, and then clamped at exact pressure to draw the wood back without overcorrecting, but manageable. The finished stripping was going well. But the carved foot was sitting on his bench like an open question, and each morning when Beau came in, he looked at it first before anything else. Audrey came in after school on the third day and found him at the carving bench, a small piece of walnut scrap in the vise, a number 4 gouge in his hand. There were already 11 practice attempts on the shelf beside him. None of them satisfied him. Can I watch? She asked. You can watch, he said. She climbed onto her stool and watched. He worked slowly, the gouge following the grain, with the particular rolling cut that takes years to make instinctive. He cut the individual toe shape and then began the undercutting, the place where the claw curved back under itself, gripping. He stopped and looked at it under the magnifying glass. Then he looked at the original foot. It's close, Audrey said. Close isn't good enough, he said. He put the scrap aside. In a museum piece, close is visible. How do you know when it's right? Beau looked at the original foot. He had been thinking about this all day. You know when it stops looking like something you made, and starts looking like something that's always been there, he said. Audrey was quiet for a moment. Then, like when you know a sentence is right in a story, it just sounds like it belongs. He looked at his daughter. Exactly like that, he said. She nodded seriously, and went to do her homework, at the small desk he'd built into the corner of the shop for exactly this purpose. He went back to the carving. On the 6th day, Harlan Whitfield arrived unannounced. This was also something Beau had learned to recognize. Clients who couldn't leave a job alone, who needed to see the work in progress, because the not seeing made them more anxious than the seeing. He didn't hold it against her. In his experience, the anxiety was usually about something else, a different client, a different deadline, a different conversation they were dreading. And the tangible thing in front of them was just the nearest available object for that anxiety to attach itself to. She walked in during the hour after school, which meant Audrey was at the end bench doing homework. Beau was at the main workbench rebuilding the finish on the repaired leg, laying down thin coats of amber shellac with a rubber, a cloth pad stuffed with shellac-soaked absorbent cotton, the traditional French polish tool, using small circular motions that left the surface looking, under the right light, almost wet. Harlan stopped inside the door. She looked at the table, which was still placed in the rolling stand. Tabletop separate, leg separate, apron panels laid out in order. It looked, at first glance, like it had been taken apart rather than reassembled, like something broken. Why is it in pieces? She said. Because I'm working on each component separately, Beau said, without looking up from the rubber. They go back together when each piece is done. I can't finish the leg if it's attached to the apron, and I can't do the apron if it's attached to the top. She walked further in. She looked at the tabletop, where the 3 stress fractures were now filled, the matches so precise that she had to crouch down and look at the surface at a raking angle to find them at all. She found them. She looked for a long moment. These matches, she said. Walnut dust from a blank I had in the shop that was close in color, Beau said, mixed with hide glue. I toned it afterward with a diluted dye before laying the first seal coat. She stood up. She looked at the carving bench, where the original damaged foot sat beside the replacement toes. 2 small walnut pieces, now carved and shaped, waiting to be fitted and glued. She picked up one of the replacement toes. Beau watched her from the corner of his eye. He had finished attempt number 19 2 hours ago. He had looked at it for 30 minutes, under the magnifying glass, and in natural light, comparing it to the original, before he'd allowed himself to believe it was right. Harlan held the carved piece and looked at it. She looked at the original. She held them up side by side. She didn't say anything. The undercutting matches, Beau said. The gouge marks follow the same direction and angle as the original carvers. Under finish, you won't be able to tell the difference. She set the piece down carefully. She looked around the shop again. Differently this time. The quick dismissive scan replaced by something slower. She looked at the photograph of Audrey by the door. She looked at the notation cards pinned above the bench, with his penciled observations about the table's construction. She looked at the worn notebook open on the corner of the workbench, filled with small technical sketches. "How long have you been doing this?" she said. 22 years, Beau said. She looked at the finished leg section drying on the stand. The shellac had been built up over multiple sessions into a surface that had depth. Not the high-gloss uniformity of a sprayed lacquer finish, but the particular warmth of French polish, where you can sense the wood still alive underneath it. "My firm does a lot of high-end residential work," she said finally. Not exactly an apology. More like a recalibration. A person updating information they'd been working with that turned out to be wrong. "I know," Beau said. She looked at him. "If this comes out the way I think it might, it'll come out right," Beau said. "That's what I can tell you." Audrey had looked up from her homework during this exchange. She was watching Harlan with the frank assessment of a 9-year-old who has not yet learned to pretend she isn't looking. Harlan noticed. "Is that your daughter?" "That's Audrey," Beau said. Harlan looked at Audrey. Audrey looked back. "Do you like it here?" Harlan asked her. "In the shop?" Audrey considered the question seriously, the way she considered most things. "I like when he's working on something hard," she said. "When it's easy, he goes quiet. When it's hard, he talks to himself." Harlan almost smiled. "What does he say?" "Mostly he says the name of the tool he needs. Sometimes he says, 'Come on.'" She paused. "One time he said a word I'm not supposed to repeat." Beau kept his eyes on his work and said nothing. Harlan looked at the shop one more time, the organized tools, the careful layout of components, the photograph, the notebook, the small desk built into the corner. And then she picked up her portfolio. "November 14th, she said. "I know," Beau said. The door closed behind her. Audrey waited approximately 4 seconds. "She came in all important feeling," she said. "She has a lot riding on this job," Beau said. "Is that why she was like that at first?" Beau set down the rubber and turned to look at his daughter. "Partly," he said. "Some people look at a place like this and they see what it's not. They don't know to look for what it is." Audrey looked around the shop the way Harlan had, but differently. The way you look at something familiar when someone else's eyes have made you aware of seeing it fresh. The tools, the current work spread out on the rolling stands, the smell of shellac and old wood and the faint sweetness of linseed. The photograph. "She looked at your tools different the second time," Audrey said. "I noticed that," Beau said. "What changed?" He picked up the rubber again and turned back to the leg. "She looked at the work," he said. "Once you look at the work, everything else looks different." The next 3 days were the kind of concentrated work that made Beau feel, afterward, like he'd lived a week in 70 hours. The finish rebuilding required multiple sessions, each coat laid down and allowed to cure before the next one went on, the surface burnished between coats with 000 Zun steel wool, until it began to develop that particular quality of depth that French polish at its best produces. The replacement toes were fitted and glued on the 7th day, the glue joints so tight that they required almost no filler at all. He spent 2 full hours carving the finished scratches onto the new toes. The small, specific marks that an original carver's tools leave behind, and that time smooths over, so that under finish they would read as original rather than new. On the 8th night, after Audrey was asleep, he sat at the main bench with all 4 legs in front of him under the shop lights, comparing them. 3 original, 1 repaired. He turned them in sequence, looking at each in the same light at the same angle. He sat there for a long time. The repair was right. Not perfect in the sense of being without evidence. The wood had a different growth ring pattern than the original, which it always would. And anyone with a dendrochronology kit and a reason to be suspicious would find it eventually. But in the world this table was going back into, a dining room in Brentwood, in the light that came through real windows, seen by people who would run their hands along the apron and look at the whole of it rather than the constituent parts. It was right. He exhaled slowly. He put the legs down. He went home and slept for 6 hours. The full reassembly happened on day 9. He drew the table together in the order the original maker had drawn it together. Legs to apron first, each joint pulled up tight, with bar clamps set at the exact angle needed to avoid racking the frame, the hide glue, working at shop temperature. Then the tabletop, fitted to the base with the original wooden buttons that allowed the top to move, with seasonal changes in humidity. Then the final surface passes. A last application of French polish to the top. A careful touch-up to the areas where the apron met the legs. A final wax of the carved feet with a clear paste wax applied by fingertip, and then buffed with a piece of soft flannel. He stood back. The table was not what it had been in 1931. You couldn't restore something to exactly what it was. The original maker had built it new, from green wood, the surface plain from stock that had never been touched before. What Beau had done was different. He had looked at everything time had done to it, decided what needed reversing and what needed honoring, and worked until the whole of it was coherent again. Until the damage was gone but the age remained. Until it read, as all good restoration should read. Not as the story of its problems, but as the uninterrupted story of itself. He photographed it carefully from 6 angles in the morning light. Then he called Harlan Whitfield. She arrived within the hour. She came in the same way she had the first day. No knock, door pushed open. But she stopped 2 steps inside, and didn't come any further. The table was set up in the center of the shop floor, in the fall morning light that came through the transom windows and lay in long rectangles across the surface. She walked toward it slowly. She didn't say anything for a long time. She ran her hand along the tabletop, feeling for the fracture lines. She crouched down and looked at the legs. She examined the apron joints. She looked at the repaired foot, comparing it to the foot beside it, and the foot beside that. She stood up. "Where's the repair?" she said. Beau came around the table and crouched beside the foot. He pointed. She looked, up close at the right angle. With the knowledge of where to look, you could see the line where new wood met old. Barely, but there. She looked at it for a long time. Then she stood up. "My client is going to ask me who did this," she said. "That's up to you," Beau said. She looked at him. She looked at the table. She looked at the shop around her, at the tools, the bench, the photograph of Audrey. "I came in here ready to be disappointed," she said. "I know," Beau said. "The shop looks." She stopped. Started again. "I've been in workshops that looked like this, and the work was ordinary. I've been in workshops that looked like showrooms, and the work was also ordinary." She ran her hand along the tabletop again. "I should have looked at your portfolio before I made any assumptions." Beau didn't answer. There was nothing useful to add. "I'll have my assistant send the final payment today," she said. She picked up her portfolio. Then she stopped. She turned back. "Your daughter," she said. "The one who said you talk to yourself when it's hard, Audrey," Beau said. "She's right about the work." Harlan looked at the table one more time. When it's this good you can feel that someone really struggled over it. It doesn't look easy. It looks like it cost something. She left. The door closed. The shop was quiet in the way it was always quiet after a big piece was done. A particular emptiness that wasn't unpleasant. The way the end of a long effort feels when the effort was worth making. Audrey came in after school that afternoon. She dropped her backpack and came straight to stand in front of the table, which was still set up in the center of the floor waiting for transport. She walked around it the way he had on day 1. Slowly. Looking. "Is it done?" she asked. "It's done," he said. She crouched down and looked at the feet. She looked at each one. She found the repaired foot and studied it without touching it. "Which one?" she said. He pointed. She looked. She looked for a long time. Longer than Harlan had looked, more careful, with the focused patience of a child who is actually curious, rather than professionally assessing. Then she stood up. "It looks like it's always been there," she said. Beau looked at his daughter. That's exactly right," he said. She went to her corner desk and opened her backpack. He started the careful process of wrapping the legs for transport. Outside, the late afternoon light was doing what it did in November in Tennessee, going golden very suddenly, very briefly, before the early dark came in. It came through the transom windows and lay across the tabletop the same way the morning light had, and in it the figure of the walnut moved the way figured wood moves in raking light, rippling slightly, as if the wood were breathing. That was the thing about old walnut. It had been 40 or 50 years growing before someone cut it and made it into something. And then it had been 90 more years being a table, and now it would be more years in a dining room in Brentwood. The wood didn't know about any of that. It just kept being what it was. It just kept holding. Beau smoothed his hand along the surface one last time, the way he always did before a piece left. Not to check anything, just because. Then he reached for the moving blanket and began wrapping it up to go.